My name is Matt O'Keefe. I work at Unitil, handling the large commercial and industrial customers, both on our gas and electric side. We'll have some contact information at the end, but I've also got my colleague, Joe Laeski, with me today, who will be asking questions as they come into the session. So why don't we go to the next slide? And so you'll see here, if you do have questions, where to put them. So there should be a little Q&A icon at the, I don't know if it's at the bottom of the screen for everybody, but it's somewhere on your screen. So if you can find that, put any questions in there, and we'll answer them as we're going along. If it makes sense to do so during the presentation. If not, we'll do it at the end. We'll have plenty of time at the end to answer any questions. If we do run out of time, we will make sure every question gets answered and sent back to folks. And I'll also have my contact information up so you can email me directly if you have any questions specific to the Unitil Large C&I program. So just a very high level, Chris did a great job this morning talking about kind of all the New Hampshire Saves programs. Just, from a large C&I perspective, the offerings are very similar to what you'll find in other state programs as well as for other sectors. Essentially, we're looking to offer an incentive to help the customer put in the most efficient equipment or system to lower their operating costs from reduced energy use. For interested sites, we can also assist with the analysis of their building with a cost share on a technical assistance audit or study, as well as equipment reviews. The key variables that we look at to determine, what incentives can be offered and if incentives could be offered are essentially the costs to get those energy efficiency savings, the conservative savings projections, and I highlight conservative. We like to make sure that we're not telling the customer they're going to save more than they actually will. And we also look at how long that measure is expected to persist before the end of its measure life. And just so folks know, most of the measure lives that we use when we're looking at different technologies, it's pretty much dictated to us from other regulatory bodies. So we're not looking so much for consultants and folks that are working on a project to say, yeah, this thing's going to be a 40-year measure. We're usually guided by other principles as far as what we can claim for the savings, which then again helps dictate what the incentives could be. So large commercial and industrial projects fall into three categories where each needs to meet a cost effectiveness criteria in order to be considered eligible for an incentive. So we look at the savings that the project will yield over its lifetime compared to the cost required to install that measure. Most common projects in New Hampshire Saves are what we call retrofit, meaning that the project is intended to change out something that is existing with a more efficient option for the sole purpose of saving energy. When combining multiple measures, these will typically be covered and reviewed under what we call our custom program applications. So we can kind of lump in a bunch of different measures for a site and make it as easy as possible for the customer to kind of see what those projects are, what the savings are, costs, and kind of one piece of paper to sign, which is always try to make it as easy as possible for the customer. New equipment is the program that we use for replacement of systems where you have alternatives of installing either a base efficient system versus a high efficient system. So most of these measures will have a unique application on the New Hampshire Saves website for submission. So if you're familiar with our website, or if you're not, you go to the business side of the New Hampshire Saves program, and you'll be able to see in there a dedicated program for things like chillers or HVAC equipment, variable frequency drives, etc. So always good to look and see again if it's going to be a new equipment because something has failed at the end of life and you're replacing it, whether or not it meets the minimal eligibility criteria before you submit that application. And lastly, we have kind of our new construction and major renovation program, which if you're doing any type of new construction or addition of square footage, it will follow one of three pathways. We have a net zero or high performance pathway. Both use an EUI or energy utilization index approach, where we basically look at the energy per square foot of the type of building, and we kind of compare where this new design will fall in relation to some thresholds that we put there for building types. And then we have what's called the systems pathway. And so for individual construction projects, where maybe the entire building isn't going to meet those other criteria for the other pathways, but you're putting in a high efficient, air compressor or something like that, where the rest of the building is kind of code minimum. The systems pathway is a good pathway for that, to look and make sure that you get your project into that incentive program. And major renovation, this is always kind of a gray area that people ask, what kind of determines if it's a major renovation or just a retrofit. So kind of a good way to think about major renovation. It's typically defined as a change to an existing space that triggers, the review as a new space. But I like to think of it as we follow that pathway if the space needs to be like vacated for a couple of months, right? So that the project can be done. That's a good way to kind of think about whether or not it falls into a major renovation designation. Worst case, ask us. So the main difference between retrofit project versus new, whether it's new equipment or new construction, is that we look at the cost to achieve the savings and the savings itself compared to an existing system if it's retrofit. And if it's new construction or new equipment, we compare it to a baseline, typically a code equivalent for that new equipment or new construction. So just kind of think of it that way, and we'll probably get back to that designation a little bit later as well. So when do you look for energy efficiency? I think everybody, probably on this presentation knows, what kind of triggers that. But basically, any type of change in existing operations, whether it's equipment replacement, space modifications, process changes within the facility, and we're seeing a lot now, more holistic review of spaces and operations with energy or sustainability mission directives from, maybe like a corporate headquarters is saying, we want to meet these kind of green initiatives or criteria to say we want to drop our energy intensity across the board, wherever their company may sit in the world. And then, ultimately you want to go where the energy is most used in a facility. So at a manufacturing site, it's very different than other large commercial customers. But a manufacturing site, as you can see here, lighting and HVAC systems might be only a tiny component of their overall energy load for a site. So these still may have good opportunities for lighting and HVAC, but a larger impact for that customer would be maybe a slight operational adjustment to a manufacturing process line or some type of process support system. And so sometimes you gotta get creative, right, and start looking at systems that aren't in every single type of location. And so manufacturing sites are good, and industrial sites are good for looking at those kind of creative opportunities. So with industrial sites, they're running typically longer operating hours for their businesses, and the support systems for their manufacturing lines are typically great opportunities to find some type of opportunity there. Could be from some adjustment to the preventive maintenance programs, where if you're able to kind of document where it was to what it will be, and there's savings opportunities there, that's a great opportunity to bring in the utilities to talk about efficiency opportunities. And kind of a more typical commercial site follows more predictable energy profiles that most folks are familiar with, where it's kind of dominated by lighting and HVAC systems. So most large customer sites have likely swapped out lighting to LEDs at this point. So while those opportunities may be less, there's still opportunities for things like lighting controls, especially networked controls, where if they don't have them already, right, you can kind of install, do some task tuning where you can lower the entire site's output after commissioning those systems. And those, again, are great opportunities to bring to the utilities to work with. And as Chris mentioned this morning at our opening session, 65% of a typical commercial site will be tied to their HVAC system. So there are great opportunities there, which will kind of highlight most of the discussion today around that. New Hampshire Saves has dedicated programs for all these energy systems in a facility and can utilize our custom program offerings to combine when they're looking at more holistic solutions for a site, multiple types of measures being rolled into one project. So in an area that can assist in working with the customer site to check across kind of all systems and always develop some key findings that can be implemented for no to low cost is some type of building commissioning. So what is that? So I think a lot of folks have heard various forms of commissioning, retro commissioning, recommissioning, monitor-based commissioning, continuous commissioning, and now we're starting a new program in Massachusetts that is going to be designated as existing building commissioning. But they're all kind of the same concept, right? That we're finding a site that, especially if they've got some form of a building management system, and we're going to focus on the commissioning of, for this purpose, we'll call it HVAC systems, where there's a good way to establish a positive relationship with a customer. Typically, you're going to be finding things that will save energy and increase comfort. So that's usually a good way to leave a customer that you're able to do that for them. And the main areas and steps that are reviewed by commissioning agents, they're doing functional checks of mechanical systems. They're doing sensor testing and comparison of what the building management system might be showing versus what the condition really is, out in the field, and then sequence review. So, the initial design of a HVAC system, who knows how long ago it was when it was initially developed, but I bet a lot has changed and they might be using it differently than it was initially intended, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse. So why is it needed? So even though equipment might be found to be broken or stuck in a fixed position, it still might not alert facility staff at the if the downstream point of measurement, like room temperature, is still being met. Nobody's calling to complain, so it could be going on for a very long time that it's likely overusing heating and cooling sources to do so. Also, find space use changes over time in buildings, and those usually focus on more cosmetic changes, likely not bringing the HVAC along in a balanced way. And when staffing is stressed, quick fixes are needed to put out fires when they're getting inundated with complaint calls. And these are commonly forgotten or rarely looked back at how that quick fix might have impacted the system when it moves from a heating to cooling mode, or vice versa. And commissioning can also identify areas where the original design just didn't incorporate common opportunities that we would use today. So if those can be retrofit with minimal intrusion, that's, again, another great opportunity for energy savings. So there's a lot of stuff that folks will look at from a commissioning perspective, but for air handlers, checking things like that, damper operations to see if they're modulating as expected with the building management system, and that the outside air damper is at a minimum as much as possible, because the same with heating and cooling and valves. If you find them stuck in a certain position, they're just using more energy than they need to be. But you also want to make sure that from a heating and cooling valve, sometimes they're shared, test them in both seasonal conditions, so making sure that they operate as they should in heating as well as they should in cooling seasons. And then just getting eyes on things like filters and coils can tell you a lot about maintenance needs. Sometimes a unit faces more open areas, can fill up with leaves and pollen, et cetera, and needs more frequent cleaning and service, or the only changing out filters and never getting eyes on coils. Those coils can get dirty, and then your energy transfer just isn't there. Air ducts and static pressure sensors can tell a lot if there's spots where downstream pressures can't be maintained, indicating leaks, or the opposite, opportunities to run at lower set points, saving fan energy. Schedules, are a key point to check, as the biggest savings still comes from turning equipment off when it's not needed. So many times these are changed for an event, and then they forget to put the schedule back, right? So it's running 24/7 or whatever it is, where a simple just review of schedules can get you to assist and find some savings there. So areas to improve the existing systems typically come from identifying locations where it was designed one way, but now it can operate more efficiently. So older air handler systems, right, would typically run with a constant volume system, where it might be able to be modified to a VAV system with some downstream components in place or added. And if it can't be easily retrofit, just identify it as next time you're changing this out, don't do a like for like change. This one can be changed with a more efficient VAV system. And then sequences. Sequences that were put in to save energy are where modifications commonly happen over the years and need to be reviewed for optimal performance. So they can also be modified to find savings with small changes. So again, if it was an older system, maybe they don't have reset schedules in there, that can take advantage of real-time conditions to save energy with heating set points, cooling set points. Air flows can be reduced with downstream conditions being met by adding some CO2 sensors, demand control ventilation systems. And then there's been changes in code ventilation requirements. So, what might have been the minimum outside air requirement when that system was initially put in, it could be, substantially less now. And then we still are finding a ton of places where when COVID conditions happened, everybody said run outside air 100%, or a lot more than what was needed. And so those still haven't been all found and corrected and put back to regular conditions. And now ASHRAE allows using indoor air quality as a way to compare your minimum ventilation requirements, which allows for a much lower amount of outside air being introduced into an air handling system than what would have otherwise been required in just a few years ago. So we'll kind of go through some of the projects we've seen come through where we're just looking at very high level major air handling systems and stuff that are typical findings. And one of the most common control sequences used out there, right, is a demand control ventilation, where it's using CO2 sensors in a space or return ductwork to tell the system how many people are in the area served by that air handling unit. So when the reading increases, system brings in more fresh air that needs to be heated or cooled. So one bad, $50 return duct sensor can lead to thousands of dollars of wasted energy when it's just not reading right. So in this case, this example shows the CO2 sensor reading very high compared to what was actually found in the field. This one found valves that work up to a point, but they won't close entirely. And then we're also finding conditions that don't line up with the building management system. So all of these are leading to wasted energy, and again, kind of good opportunities to work with a customer to fix those, increase comfort, save energy, all good stuff. Another one is a site where we found an outside air damper disabled to run wide open. So instead of utilizing some of that warmer return air that it's got available to it, it's got to heat the cooler outside air all the way up to the supply temperature set point that it's maintaining fine. So again, you're not going to find anybody that says, hey, this isn't working right in the building, because they're getting the temperatures they want. But if you look at this system, you'll see, hey, we should be using all of this return air as much as we can, so that we don't have to heat this outside air. And then it also leads to other things that could be damaging to the customer site, where if that thing's disabled open and it doesn't have a freestat that is working properly, when those temperatures get colder than 50 degrees outside, coils can freeze, and then that's a much more expensive repair that customers are commonly having to deal with. So kind of bringing it all back together, whether you're pursuing existing building commissioning or other typical site-specific projects, the process remains the same. Get us involved early. If we don't know about the project, there's no guarantee we'll be able to assist. Funding is also limited. Chris mentioned this morning about the 3-year plan, which we're currently in the 2nd year of that 3-year plan. So all of that is great. The flexibility of having projects that can carry over from 1 year to the next helps us as well as you, which is great. But we still may be at a point where funding is fully committed before the end of the 2026 program year, right? That would be year 3. So if stuff is lined up, you think it's happening, you might not have a specific timeline yet. Again, just kind of keep us in the mix so that we know and have it on our radar that we might need to be holding some funding aside in case that project goes forward. And then keep us informed as much as possible during the project timeline. So if things get delayed, it's okay, but it's better to know about it as opposed to being, nagged that, hey, we gave you funding until this date, that date's coming. Let us know so that we can make sure that we've got the funding to extend the timeline on that. So that's it. Thanks for listening. Again, my name is Matt O'Keefe. Here's my email. So I am, again, the Unitil Large C&I rep, but Joe, who's in the room here with me, handles our smaller commercial and industrial customers. So either one of us, you're going to get to somebody at Unitil that will be handling projects in our territory, and then there'll be a list of the proper contacts for the other utilities in New Hampshire Saves that you can reference. Send some questions in, and we'll start answering those. And if we run out of time, like I said, all answers will be available at some point that we'll get these out to folks. So I will kick it over to Joe. Joe, do we have a question?
Yeah, Matt. So there's been a few questions that have come in. And as we answer those, if anybody else has any additional questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A. First question that came in was, how do we know what costs of a project will qualify for an energy efficiency rebate?
Yeah, so we kind of skipped over pretty quickly, but it's a common question that comes in, and really, again, kind of bringing in your utility program administrator early will allow a review of what that potential project might cover. But it usually depends on what the project entails. Is it replacing failed or likely to fail equipment? Or is it being pursued solely for the energy savings? That kind of goes into that new equipment versus retrofit designation. And we basically, again, we're looking at all those costs associated to achieve those savings. So retrofit, it's the whole enchilada, everything that it takes to achieve those energy savings. And then if it's a new equipment, it's going to be just that, what we call incremental cost, to go from a base condition. So if we use a chiller as an example, if it's a base code equivalent chiller versus a high efficient chiller, what's that price premium? Those are the costs that we build into our calculations. And then again, everything hinges on what the savings are, and we'll do the same thing on the savings side for new equipment. We won't compare it to what was there before. We'll compare it to what a code minimum would be. And I will say for retrofit projects, for savings calculations, especially what's being presented to a customer, be conservative with those savings. It's never great if they see a proposal that says, yeah, this is a 2-year payback before any incentive comes in. And then we look at the project and we kind of model those savings, and we're like, yeah, we expect this to be half of what the proposal shows. So it's never good to overpromise to a customer, I guess, is the answer there.
So Matt, next question that came in is, can you do a comprehensive project that is Eversource Electric and Unitil Gas at the same site?
Absolutely. So we all work together, and we're constantly communicating with each other on projects. So sometimes in that case where Eversource is the electric and Unitil is the gas, I might get the first call from somebody at a site saying, yeah, we're going to do this project at this site. And I'll be able to tell that we're the gas and then Eversource is the electric. And then we'll have some communication with the Eversource program administrator for that site to let them know that we're working on a shared project. So that's typically the process that we'll go through there, but definitely we'll work together so that the customer is only dealing with kind of one project team. Good question.
For HVAC equipment, why are the savings not using the replaced equipment, but are being treated as new instead?
So it gets back to that kind of new equipment designation. If the piece of equipment fails or is likely to fail, right? So it's 15-year-old rooftop unit. You can't go buy the 15-year-old piece of equipment, or maybe you can on some used market. But the concept is if you are going to replace that, there's going to be a kind of code minimum type of equipment that would have to be purchased, and we use that designation as, all right, we're only going to accept the savings from going from that base rooftop unit to the high efficient system. The good part is that even though the savings will be less, we're also looking at just the incremental cost to do so that from a cost effectiveness perspective, we're not comparing the entire project cost. We're only looking at that incremental cost, because all of that rigging and piece of equipment and stuff that you need to replace, even if it was a base unit, that kind of gets wiped out, and we're just looking at that extra premium cost to go to the more efficient equipment. Good question.
What percentages of commissioning studies can be covered by the energy efficiency incentives?
Yeah, so it really depends. Commissioning studies are, as I kind of mentioned before, that there's so many versions of what folks would call commissioning studies, and some can be wildly comprehensive, where they're getting down to terminal units within a space, which means that you're spending a lot of engineering dollars to go down and make sure that a VAV is working properly, or a fin tube radiator is working properly. And those are great, but those are expensive. And so if it's a $75,000 commissioning study that tells you that a bunch of radiators aren't working, and the fix saves 20 therms a year, we just can't pay for the $75,000 study. So it will all hinge on where the savings are going to be, which is why I kind of highlighted from our purposes, what's that sweet spot of a study. And we think it's going to be that high level system. So an air handler, main heating plant, chilled water plant, making sure that those, the largest pumps in the system or the largest fans in the system, that the equipment that is tied to those, what is happening with that equipment. So that's where, like, one outside air damper or one sensor that is tied back to that main piece of HVAC equipment, that will have a better savings per investment into commissioning or into investigation. So it's all over the place, but our percentage will definitely come down to what we think will yield savings that will pay for that cost. Good question.
Eversource has now offered a monitored-based commissioning program. Will that be available at Unitil as well?
Yeah, so we are aware and trying to find where that fits into our program offerings. Definitely, we will have something where we'll be able to incentivize it. Will we be able to do it at the same kind of prescriptive methodology that Eversource and National Grid are doing in Massachusetts? It'll be different. And that's why I mentioned to the existing building commissioning program that's going to be rolled out in Massachusetts. That will be statewide in Massachusetts, where funding levels are a little bit higher than they are in New Hampshire. So we'll have to look at it in a way where, again, the savings will have to drive what our investment will be. A short answer, absolutely. If it's something that's going to save money for the customer and save energy, we'll have incentive dollars available. Just we don't have a statewide monitoring-based commissioning program in New Hampshire yet, but we're always striving for consistency. So as long as it can be justified from a cost perspective, we'll support those projects.
How are commissioning repairs captured in an energy savings analysis?
Again, another one that's kind of all over the place depending on commissioning firms. So there's a lot of engineering consultants that also provide commissioning, and they also do like energy modeling and things like that. So in some cases, we see commissioning studies that will actually have kind of an expected energy savings in the reports that the customer sees. That's great, but again, typically that means more costs have gone towards the energy savings analysis for that report. We also see just commissioning agents that might be used for like new construction and functional testing, where they're just giving you a list of, yeah, we looked at this, we tried to have it move, it didn't, this is a problem, and so we'll take those and look at those analyses to try to then highlight, well, we think this, if fixed, will save energy. And then, we can work either with, our own engineering teams to develop savings analyses. There's also, again, kind of mentioned the Massachusetts programs. They're a little bit more robust and I guess tested out than we've done so far in New Hampshire. So there are some prescriptive savings approaches that have been used so far in Massachusetts where, might not be exact, but if you know a couple of key variables like size of the building, type of system that we're looking at doing like a control sequence change to, and we know the energy use for that facility. If you added a supply air temperature reset to that air handling system, based on all those other variables, it spits out a expected savings. It's not great. It's not going to be super specific, but on average, if it's been tested and vetted, it's a methodology that we can replicate and use on our projects. And we're also looking, as I mentioned, that existing building commissioning program that will be unrolled probably sometime this summer in Massachusetts. There's going to be a prescriptive element to that as well, where we're hoping to be able to use all of these commissioning analyses that have been done across the country to basically say, based on this type of report, if you kind of tick all of the boxes to say that you've investigated these systems, typical savings will be X% of their overall energy use. Super simple. It'd be great if we can start to kind of simplify things like that, because I think what happens a lot is that these studies sometimes are just too expensive, and either the customer doesn't want to do them, or we can't bring enough money to the table to get them done, or they spend the money on the study and then don't do the quick low cost fixes, which is what we want to get to at the end of the day. Good question.
Next question kind of pulls a string on that a little bit further is, can the commissioning agent also perform the repairs for the customer?
Yeah, so ideally no, but you come into situations where the controls subcontractor is essentially the owner's representative or staff, where they're the only ones that can touch those systems. And ideally, you don't want the person developing the work scope that also then gets paid to do that work. So there's a little bit of a conflict there, but it all comes down to documentation of your findings. So if that third party, controls contractor is also your kind of commissioning agent, it's show us what you found before anything was fixed. What's the proposal to fix it? Let's trend that equipment to show what it was before and after. And then we build into, I think most folks are familiar with our minimum requirements documentation. So we would build in some level of kind of persistence there, where we expect to see this fix operating sometime down the road, so that it's not just done to get a rebate and then next thing you know, Jimmy flips the switch again and things running 24/7. So we want to make sure that we're able to show that the savings will be there for a long period of time after done.
Currently, there's no other questions in the Q&A. So if anybody has any last minute questions, feel free to put them in.
Well, again, I want to thank everybody for joining. Hopefully this was informative, and as other great sessions, both Joe and I are jumping to other sessions right now, so you'll hear us doing the Q&A on those. But again, thanks everybody for joining. The one takeaway I'd have is that we all work together, all the different utilities and program administrators. So the idea is that you're going to get a consistent delivery of these programs and projects across the state. So if there's concerns on will a project work here and there, just ask us. I mean, as long as the funding's available, we are trying to be as consistent as possible. All right, thanks. Appreciate everybody's time here, and we'll talk to you all soon.